Hello everyone, welcome back to Legends of the Spire. I'm Dave and I've been away for the summer break, but back and ready and raring to go with more podcasts. I've been having to think about how it all runs over the summer, and it's very much not going to be different really. I really enjoy speaking to the former players and managers and people connected with the club of Chesterfield, so that's not going to change. It is getting harder to find them, in all honesty. So they may become more infrequent as we get through the season, but we'll see. If people get back to me, if people are up for being interviewed and we've got time in everyone's busy diaries, then I will get them recorded and get them out there. And I've certainly got some podcasts to get us over the next kind of 4 or 5 weeks, so no problem there. On the podcast this week is Lawrie Madden. Now Lawrie had a really great career at clubs like Charlton, Sheffield Wednesday and Wolves before joining Chesterfield when he was very much a veteran in 1993. He was part of John Duncan's promotion winning team, and it was really interesting having a chat with him about that time at the club. He then went on to have a really good journalism career as well, so it was good to speak to him about post-playing career, and then also he had a really great perspective of John Sheridan and Paul Cook as people that he played with. So he was with John Sheridan at Sheffield Wednesday and Paul Cook at Wolves. And I think especially when he was talking about Paul Cook and how he treated younger players when he was a player, has very much come to fruition in him as a manager as well. So I think it's a really interesting listen. As always, we are at Spire Legends on Twitter and Instagram, Legends of the Spire on Facebook, so it would be great to hear from you. And if you haven't seen already on social media, I am starting an old school paper fanzine. Calling it Linda's Sandwich Shop, after the amazing sandwich shop around that Saltergate era, and looking for contributors. So you don't need any experience. I'm quite happy for it just be ramblings on a page. So do get in touch with me at legendsofthespire@outlook.com. Send me an email or get in touch with me on social media. It'd be great to hear from you. But without further ado, in this incredibly windy Leeds, let's go to a new podcast. Here we are with Lawrie Madden.
Legends of the
Basically, growing up, like most people in the East End, we used to play over at Hackney Marshes, which is quite a famous sort of area for talent spot. There used to be about 100 football fields. It's actually opposite now. It's actually opposite the Olympic Park near Stratford. And it used to be busy, packed every Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon with all the teams from East London and further afield playing there. And it was a big area for scouts to come and see because you had 100 pitches, so you could watch a lot of players in one go. Also, it was a very fertile growing area. You know, I mean, if you think about it, there's certain areas in the country that doesn't seem to produce players. There's other areas that predominantly do produce players, and East London had a big knack of producing a lot of players, a bit like, you know, the North East is another good hunting ground, and various places like that. So you can imagine if you're a scout of a club, it was, you know, Hackney Marshes was a godsend for you, where you've got 100 games going on at any one time, you know, over the weekend, you know. So yeah, that's where I sort of you know, and it was they had cow sheds there. They didn't have the dressing rooms like we have today, so you used to have like these old cow sheds where afterwards you had these muddy boots that you used to clean with the taps and all that type of stuff. So it wasn't glamorous, but that's what we all grew up with.
Yeah, and I heard you mention on another thing that you'd done that it was either usually a choice between football or boxing when you was growing up.
Yeah, well, Bethnal Green at that time was Repton Boxing, which was a very reputable boxing club, and a lot of players, John X. Tracy, Charlie Magri, a lot of boxers went through Repton, made it professionally and became sort of British champions and various other things. So in terms of sport, boxing and football were the two main sports in, you know, things like cricket and rugby just weren't heard of really.
Yeah. So how did you juggle your time then between kind of education and trying to start a football career? How did you balance it all?
Well, it was okay initially. I was at Arsenal playing for their youth team, and then they asked me to sign as an apprentice in those days, as it was called. I'm sure they call it something else these days. Bertie Mee was manager at the time, and he said, "Would you like to sign on as an apprentice?" And I was doing my O-levels at that time, so I said, "Well, I can't really." So I stayed on doing my O-levels. And then 2 years later, I was asked again to sign pro this time. I was offered a 2-year contract at Arsenal. And I did my A-levels, and I got good enough grades to go to university. So then I had a bit of a dilemma to make. What do I do? Do I stay at Arsenal with a 2-year contract, or do I go to university? And it was an interesting one. My mother wanted me to sign for Arsenal. My father wanted me to go to university. And at that time, Bob Wilson was the goalkeeper at Arsenal. And Bertie said, "I'm taking off my Arsenal hat here, but if I was you, I'd go to university." But he said, "Have a word with Bob Wilson." Bob came into the game late. He went to Loughborough University. He did a degree. Have a word with Bob. So I went to see Bob Wilson. I said, "Bob, can I, a bit of advice and explain the situation?" He said, "If I was you, I'd sign for Arsenal." So I had my mum and dad totally different. I had the manager and the goalkeeping coach of Arsenal in Scotland telling me something different. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I made up my own mind and I went to university. At that time, I think the thing was only about 4% of the population went to university compared to now, where the government's target is more like 50%. So I thought at that time there wasn't, if you were starting off now, and the rewards and riches that are in the game, I think I probably would have made a different choice. But at that time, we were living in a different era, a different world, and I was looking more for the long term and having an education,
And just a word on Bob Wilson. He was a guest on the podcast about a year ago, I think. He's a great bloke, isn't he? It was great having a chat with Bob Wilson.
Yeah, whatever advice Bob gave, he obviously gave it sincerely. It was a view that he took. I didn't actually take it, but I've got a lot of time for him because he gave me the time to talk to me, and I was still a relatively young lad, and he took the time. He was, as I said, first team goalkeeper at Arsenal at the time. He was also playing for Scotland in World Cup matches and all the rest of it. But he went out of his way, and I can't thank him enough for it.
Did you put football out of your mind then for a bit? When you were at university?
Well, not really, because even though I went to university, I went to Manchester University. So even though on a Friday night I used to travel down to London, I used to play for the Arsenal youth team and then the reserve team. So for a couple of years, I played for Arsenal reserve team. So I used to travel down every sort of weekend and play for Arsenal reserves.
And then it was Mansfield, wasn't it? Where you kind of
it was actually through the Arsenal connection. At the time, Dave Smith was the reserve team coach at Arsenal, and then he got the job at Mansfield. And later on, he got a certain amount of becoming famous and notoriety for getting Plymouth Argyle in the lower divisions to the semi-final of the FA Cup. So Dave went to Mansfield, and he rang me up and he said, "Would you like to come and play for Mansfield?" Which is obviously meant playing in the Football League. And the other thing was it was a shorter distance from Manchester to Mansfield. So I did, that was my first step in playing in the Football League at that time, at about 18, 19 years of age.
Yeah, I was going to say, I suppose it wasn't too strange then moving out of London, was it, if you were already kind of up around Manchester? Anyway, with stuff.
Yeah, as I say, it wasn't bad. As I said, I knew Dave as well, so he'd been the reserve team coach at Arsenal, so there was a certain amount of familiarity. But obviously, this was a big step up for him, being a reserve team coach. Even though it was a top club, but moving up from a first team coach, a reserve team coach, to manager of a Football League, so it was a big step up for him. And so it was, quite a nice feeling when he come and sort of asked me to come on board.
So what kind of player were you at the start of your career then? Did you change kind of how you played, positions, anything like that throughout your career? Or?
Yeah, I played for Hertfordshire at the time, under 15s, and I was centre forward. And then gradually over the years, I sort of worked my back. I played for Charlton for a long period of time in midfield before I went back to centre half. And then eventually I sort of become a regular defender there on in after that.
And I suppose that means and nowadays, especially all your defenders nowadays are all ball playing defenders, aren't they? You have to be really good on the ball, don't you, nowadays? So I suppose back then it kind of helps if you had a bit of.
Well, the other thing, you didn't have the squads that you used was at when I was at Charlton. I think I played in 7 or 8 different positions, and when I was at Millwall, I think I played in about 9. So 1 minute you were playing right wing, central midfield, next minute left back or centre half. That was so. From that point of view, it was quite a good experience in that you got used to playing in different positions. So I think in the long run, it was beneficial for me.
And it means you're on the pitch, I suppose, which is the most important thing, isn't it? End of the day, wherever you're playing.
Well, yeah. As I said, they didn't have the big squads. When we're talking about the modern day football, one of the things is the squad system. Now the squads are quite big. They weren't that big when we were playing, and so you had to be prepared to move around to fit in. People getting injured, suspended, people losing form, that type of stuff.
Results of the weekend was Charlton's win at Chesterfield, producing one of the best goals of the weekend, scored by Derek Hales.
He gets the sort of crosses in that front players really love. Down from Robinson, and here is Hales, and the first sight he had of goal, and he really made the most of it.
Yeah, and you touched a bit on Charlton. So you're at Charlton, weren't you? You had a couple of years at Boston, and then ended up with Charlton. That was kind of, I noticed, I was looking last night, you had a kind of relegation promotion, one of those seasons where you kind of bounced back at Charlton, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I had that twice in my career, because we got relegated at Charlton and then bounced back the following year. And the same at Sheffield Wednesday, we got relegated under Big Ron, and then the following year we got promoted. It was also the year we won the cup again, cup final against Man United. So I've had 2 sort of relegations and promotions. As I said, when I was at Boston, I messed up with Howard Wilkinson then, and we won the Northern Premier League at that time. And then at Mansfield, before that, we'd won the old 4th division. They got 2 promotions in 2 seasons at Mansfield. So going to Charlton and getting relegated was my first downside, if you like to put it that way. But then, as I say, we rectified that within a season, and we were back up again.
It's a good way to start your career, isn't it? Getting plenty of bits of silverware along the way.
Well, yeah. I mean, also, along my way, I had a lot of different managers. People like Howard Wilkinson, George Graham, Ron Atkinson. All managers who are reasonably successful, but all in a different way.
Mm. Who did you really like playing under most? Who did you feel like you really?
I think Ron Atkinson. I mean, Howard was basically, when he was at Sheffield Wednesday, I always thought Howard was ahead of his time. His preparation was meticulous, attention to detail. He was into diets. He was into football analysis. He was into all these things that we now take for granted in the modern day. But Howard was a pioneer in that, and he was very much into that sort of thing. It was very intense. He was also, I think, he took a bit of a leaf out, I think, of the American football coaches, where he thought he was motivated. We would have team talks, inspirational team talks for an hour and a half, on a regular basis, So at times, by the time we were going out, I remember people like Nick Lyons, he'd be banging his head against the dressing room door. He couldn't wait to get out. And then we had Ron Atkinson, who was a totally different kettle of fish. And we'd be looking at the 2:30 at Ascot before we went out to play. And then his team talks were about 30 seconds long. And he used to say, if they play as well as they can, and if we play as well as we can, we'll win. Off you go. So, it was a complete chalk and cheese, really. So, and they were both successful. So when you say what makes a winner or what makes success, it comes in all different forms,
Well, it's interesting as well, because obviously at Chesterfield this last season, we had a change of manager from someone who was maybe allegedly a bit more authoritarian to Paul Cook, who's very much seems like a motivator and like take them to the pub, watch the races. Is it quite difficult to adjust when you get a change like that in boss? Does it take some players a lot longer than others?
I think so, and I think what happened is, I mean, I know Cookie because I played with Cookie at Wolves. So I was there for 2 years with Cookie, and Cookie was. I hope he doesn't mind me saying it. I thought he underachieved for his ability. He had absolutely everything. He could do, he could do everything with his left foot, pass short, pass long. He had, when we used to do being tested for fitness and that, he would be near the top of the range. He had everything. He could head balls, everything else. And I think he underachieved. He should have played at a lot higher level. So he would probably have to ask himself why he didn't. I don't know, but that would be the question, Sorry, I went off there on a tangent. I forgot what you asked me.
That's all right. No, I was just when you get a change of manager and they're a completely different style of person, can it knock players off kilter a little bit?
Well, it varies quite considerably. The one thing is, if they have, I was at Millwall and George Graham come in, and within a very short period of time, he had decided these players weren't for him. And when Ron Atkinson came in, he decided that some of the players weren't for him. So when they come in, with Howard, we were very direct. We played the long ball. And with Ron, it was all about passing and various other things. So he wanted different players for the way he particularly wanted to play. And George Graham was the same. So as a result, they went about moving players on and bringing players in.
And can that upset the harmony a bit in the dressing room when things like that happen?
Well, I think initially there's a lot of comings and goings, and obviously it's a bit uncertain, but gradually things settle down. And at the end of the day, you're a professional, you want to do well. And as I said, Ron's strength was, Howard was an exceptional coach. Ron, coaching wasn't his forte. His strength was man management, and he also had a good eye for a player. His recruitment was good. So as I said, they were both successful. Howard is the last British manager to have won the Premier League. Ron won cups and it was at big clubs, Man United, Aston Villa, and had reasonable success with them. George Graham, he was at Arsenal, Leeds, so they all won things in their own way. But they're all different. Their emphasis on different things, really. So I suppose it just shows you it takes more than one way to skin a cat,
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to mention, so after your spell at Charlton, you had a little spell at Millwall, didn't you? And you won the Football League Group Cup, which replaced the Anglo-Scottish Cup, didn't it? It's obviously still a claim to fame for Chesterfield that we're still the holders of the Anglo-Scottish Cup.
Right.
The last time we did it. So I think that was probably the last year. I think they only did that cup for a couple of years, didn't they? The Football League Group Cup. What was the highlight? Yeah,
it was an interesting one, that one, because George had taken over and he had to play the players that he inherited because all of his new players were cup tied. So all the players that were playing in this competition knew that their time was up. So I think they wanted to show George what they could do, even though George had made up his mind. And to be fair to George, he said he wouldn't take any credit for winning it because he said it weren't nothing to do with him. He'd inherited his squad and he had to play them. If it was a league game, half of them want to be playing. So that's the sort of situation. And what happens is it's not a particularly nice camp until the manager can get rid of the players that he wants and get the players that he wants in, which is what you were talking about with Ron. So if he can do it quickly, if at the end of the season players' contracts are up and they can go and he can get players in, then it's a lot smoother. But if in the middle of the season, occasionally you have these sort of things, and in this case, it actually worked for Millwall because players wanted to show him what they were missing.
Nothing like a bit of extra motivation.
Yeah.
To win a cup. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. A slight tenuous Chesterfield link in terms of how it linked to the Anglo-Scottish Cup, but I suppose they were trying a few things around them, weren't they, in terms of different cups and things like that.
Yeah.
And then, so then you go on to Sheffield Wednesday, which is obviously massive period of time, hundreds of games, quite a lot happened. Kind of give us a whistle-stop tour of what happened while you were at Wednesday in terms of kind of achievements and things like that.
Well, I didn't think I'd be. My contract ran up at Millwall, and George Graham offered me a new contract. and I decided not to take it. And so I then became a free agent. And Howard Wilkinson at that time was first team coach at Notts County in which we called the Premiership then. Sheffield Wednesday were actually in the division below at that time. And Howard said, look, I want you to come. I know Howard had made a bid for me when I was at Charlton. So now he was at Notts County. He said, I want you to come to Notts County. So, I was debating that. Then at the end of that season, Howard left Notts County and become manager at Sheffield Wednesday. So I thought that may be the end of that, because obviously his playing requirements may be totally different at Sheffield Wednesday. He may want to give the players a bit of a chance, see what they're like before he makes his mind up about them. Anyway, he rang me up and said, look, I want you to come up. So I come up, and I got married at that time on the Saturday, and I went up to Sheffield on the Sunday, and we started training on the Monday. So I didn't have a honeymoon. That was it. So, and then I signed for Sheffield Wednesday, initially for 2 years, and I stayed for a lot longer. Yeah. Then the first year we were in there, we got promoted along with Chelsea. And to be fair, you talk about what it does to make for promotions. There's lots of things. For instance, as long as you don't get injuries, suspensions, loss of form. But the other thing is, we were two teams that were better than the rest of the division. And that's not, being both. It's a bit like Man City and Liverpool this year. They were better than anyone else by a long way. And that's why the other teams knew they weren't going to win it. We knew we got promoted weeks before the end of the season. And it happens that way sometimes. You get teams who are outstanding that dominate the division, and us and Chelsea went neck and neck, and I think they beat us in the end on goal difference. So we went up with Chelsea, and there was a big gap between the third team and the first and second. And as I said, there was a big gap this year between Man City and Liverpool. As I say, it happens. And when you get relegated, you can blame injuries, you can blame suspensions, you can blame loss of form. Also, it may be you're not good enough.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Like as I remember a few times in my time watching Chesterfield, we've had a really, really good team of him, been at the top of the table, and there's kind of a few times where I remember thinking to myself, I've got to make sure I enjoy this, because this is a really stellar team. Like as a player, do you get that same kind of moment when you're riding high? Do you ever get a chance to just stop when you're riding high, one of the best teams, and think, actually, yeah, this is a really good team?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of it depends on the manager. With Howard, he would never. I think one of the regrets with Howard is that we didn't enjoy enough of our moments of success. Ron Atkinson, on the other hand, he made us sure that we would enjoy. I remember when we went down to Wembley. We were playing Man United on the Sunday. We went down on the Friday. We stayed at the Royal Lancaster in London, and they put on a champagne reception for us on the Friday night. We went to a restaurant in Mayfair where we were allowed to have a drink. He treated us very, very well. He wanted us to savour the whole weekend, not just the match, and he did. And it was quite, it's probably common knowledge. He had Stan Boardman, the comedian, on the coach going to the game. He was telling jokes all the way to the football match. So we were one of the most relaxed teams, and he enjoyed it. He made us enjoy it. He said, "You never know when these Wembley appearances are going to come round. Let's enjoy it." And so, just as managers have different ways, and that was it. And I think Ron tried to make it as enjoyable for not just us, but our families as well.
Yeah, and like I say, cup final. So. Nice having a Wembley trip, isn't it?
Yeah, we at that time we just got relegated that year, and we'd played. It was ironic. We played Brentford at home in the very first game, who were in the lower level of the Football League, and we drew 0-0. Not a particularly auspicious start. So we went down to Aldershot for the replay, and we beat them 9-0. ironically. And then after that, you're talking about gelling together and taking off and everything else. And I think one of the benefits of as I say, when I got relegated at Charlton and when we got promoted again, and then the same with Sheffield Wednesday under Ron, one of the things was, which getting onto the modern day would be more difficult, is keeping the same team, keeping that team, and he kept the team. And I always remember talking to Ron afterwards. He always thought he'd lose some of his players. He was particularly concerned about losing Roland Nilsson, the Swedish international. He said it's absolute certain Man United will come in for him. He couldn't believe that he didn't come in for him anyway. Roland, and this is a sign of the attitude of players at that time, maybe compared different. Roland said, I was in the team that got us relegated. I want to be in the team that gets us promoted. And, that was such what a healthy attitude from a player who, was playing for his country. They finished third in the World Cup, whatever. So he's an outstanding player,
Yeah.
Pearson now covering as McClare takes the ball up again for Manchester United. Ince is down for the moment. McClare gets the better of King, gets the ball in across there, Blackmore, right across the face of the goal. It looked as though it had to go in. And Madden just brings it away. The wily old professional keeps it into play. He's not going to waste this ball. Finds Hurst with it. Williams up ahead of him. United are really stretched now as Williams goes into overdrive, but Seed is there.
Towards the final, we were struggling in the league. We almost blew promotion because of it. But we managed to keep our, we were a very good team, but we struggled in that division. When we played in the cup to get to the final, we played Derby, who were in the top half of the top league. We played Chelsea in the semi-final, who was in the top six, and we played Man United, who were in the top six. We played well against those type of seeds. Our football seemed to suit them. We went down to Chelsea, beat them, come back to Hillsborough in the two-legged final, beat them, and then Manchester United in the final. So we played, I think, 3-4 Premiership clubs to get there, even though we were a division lower. So I think it said, but in that division, we actually struggled at times. At times we completely dominated teams, and other times we struggled to hold our own. It was a strange season from that point of view, and I think we would have been kicking ourselves if we hadn't got promoted. But it was not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to ask, as Chesterfield fans, sometimes we compare Paul Cook and John Sheridan as managers, but I suppose it's interesting to get your comparison of them as players, with you having played with them both, I suppose.
Yeah, both wonderful players. At Sheffield Wednesday, it's about blends and balances. John Sheridan, great passer of the ball, short passer of the ball, long passer of the ball. When you got a ball, the weight of the pass was superb. It was never one of these up-ranger chests hit at 100 mile an hour. It was well weighted. But he could also do other things. He was good in the air. He had a nasty side to him. He could tackle when he wanted to. He could put in, his challenges were as fierce as anyone. And he was a very determined player, really. He was a winner. He wanted to win. Cookie, on the other hand, exceptional ability. As I said earlier, he had this care sort of attitude. And I think sometimes I just wonder if it had more of a disciplinarian manager, whether that would have nurtured and developed that better. I think he might have done well under someone like Ron Atkinson. You with me?
Yeah.
Or even Howard Wilkinson, someone who would have given a bit of discipline, a bit of direction, and also Cookie liked to be loved, and as I said, with Ron, with John Sheridan, it was always quite amusing. Talking to him, Ron was never big into team talks, but he used to go up to Shez. He says, Shez, do something special today. Get me off my seat. Do something, and that was it. And that would be his team. He'd go around to each player and basically have a comment like that, to someone, and that used to be his comment to Shez.
So when you were playing, would you have seen Sheridan and Cook as being good managers? and going into management?
I must admit, I hadn't really thought of them as going into management, and I would have thought their styles might be different. I mean, looking at Cookie's record, he seems to go to get young players to nurture and develop them, and I think that's part of his selling to a lot of chairmen, knowing they haven't got a lot of money and all that type of stuff. And I think Shares is, tries to get them organised and tries to get them playing to the best of their ability. So I don't know them as managers. I've not been in their company when they've been managing, so I can't really give a good answer to that one, if you like to put it like, or a well thought out answer. I only know them as players and what they were like as players, and then trying to imagine what they would be like as managers, really.
Yeah. And how did football change around then? Because obviously the Premier League kind of came in, didn't it? Probably was that just after you'd left Wednesday, maybe. How did football all change around then? Because it was the time of Sky Sports coming in and everything like that, wasn't it? It was everything went global very quickly, didn't it?
Yeah. When just going back to Charlton, just to try and give you some sort of comparison at Charlton, excuse me, we had a manager, an assistant manager, and a youth team coach, and a physio. And the assistant manager would take the reserves. Okay, that was all they had. Didn't have a team bus. The manager would put the balls, bibs, and cones in his car. We used to call them BBC, and that was his staff. Then obviously you're talking about the introduction of Sky, and that started gradually. Each particular contract that came up for renewal, they got more and more money. Then the overseas market started kicking in, and now we are where we are today. I mean, the overseas market is a big, it's been underestimated, but it's selling the Premier League in more ways than one. I remember I was the pitchside reporter for Premier League Productions, which used to produce the overseas production for the Premier League. And it used to be quite interesting. Sky used to rave about if they got 10 million people watching a live game. And on a Sunday, it used to go around the world, the Premier League, to over 200 countries. And on a poor day, they'd get 400 million viewers. And on a good day, like for instance, when Man City and Liverpool were playing and we didn't know the outcome, you'd get 1 billion people watching. So, that's why these teams now, once COVID is over and everything gets back to normal, you'll start seeing these teams doing overseas trips to America. You'll start seeing them doing overseas trips to the Far East and Middle East. They've got massive fan bases there now, and their websites are in 5 different languages. So it's a totally different world. This is one of the reasons I think partly a lot of American owners want to get involved. They haven't managed to sell American football, baseball, like Premier League has managed to sell football around the world globally, as you mentioned earlier. So you can see, going back to the ball, bibs, and cones being put in a boot of a car. Now, look how many staff you have at a football club. I mean, it's like it's a bit like going to a mini cinema now. You need so many seats there for all the staff, doing it and everything else. Now it's just totally changed. It's galvanised the game in totally ways that we didn't know.
And it's mind blowing, isn't it? Really, when you think about how simple the game is, really, in that you can just have a ball and you can just go out and kick it on the street or whatever. I suppose that's kind of part of the appeal, isn't it? Really, that it's something that's so simple that it's just a simple language, isn't it? I suppose.
Well, it is a simple language in that way. Having said that, I've seen. And if ever I had the opportunity to interview him, I would like to ask him purely on a personal level. Pep Guardiola has said that he's managed in many countries throughout Europe, but by far managing in England and the expectations is so high. And I'd like to sort of ask him, what he means by that in more detail rather than, and I think that's quite an interesting comment.
Yeah, it isn't. Would you like to have been a footballer nowadays? Obviously, you earn a lot of money, I suppose, but there's a lot more.
Yeah, I mean,
stuff that comes around.
I've got to be honest. I wonder it's very difficult, I would have thought. I wonder how much it would have changed me, because it would certainly, the acclaim, the fame and everything else. And could I have handled it? I don't know.
So we've had like half an hour. I've not even asked you about Chesterfield yet. So you came to Chesterfield. So it was like the 93-94 season, wasn't it? Start of that. So I think John Duncan had come in the February, I think, of that year, something like that.
Yeah.
So how did that move all come about then?
Well, I was playing for Darlington at that time, and then John rang me up because I was on a very short-term contract at Darlington. He rang me up and said, "Would you like to come to Chesterfield?" So I met him at the Doubletree Hotel at Norton, just between Sheffield and Chesterfield. And he said, "Would you come and play at Chesterfield?" And to be fair, part of the attraction of Chesterfield was the locality. It was close to me. I was travelling up to Darlington. It was taking me an hour and a half there and another hour and a half back every day. I was in my 30s at the time, and I thought, going Chesterfield would be a better option from that point of view. So that basically, I signed a contract at that time.
And yeah, that season. So your debut, I think, was against West Ham, wasn't it? Coca-Cola Cup, I think it says here. What was that first season like? I think we finished 8th that season, 93-94.
Yeah, I think that particular year, it was an interesting season for many reasons, really. I mean, the place was in a poor state of repair, being totally honest. I mean, the dressing rooms, they were leaking from the ceilings. On match day, we'd have buckets, and John Duncan would be talking around, buckets full up with water, because they were pouring down with rain. We used to train on public parks. They didn't have their own training ground. I mean, many an argument between people who had their dogs. So this is a public park. We're allowed to walk our dogs on the pitch, and we're trying to play football. So it wasn't the most glorious sort of setup. So you had to deal with that. But that was part and parcel of the course. And I think that one of the things there was. He brought Nicky Laws in, came in after it. I think what John did was, like most managers, you've got to have a particular strength, whether it's either being a good coach, a good communicator, or a good judge in players. And John made us difficult to beat, that season. We could go anywhere. No one really would give us a hiding, but we didn't quite have enough going the other way. And he rectified that during the season for the following year. And he realised that we were tough at the back to break down, but you couldn't keep defending for 90 minutes. You needed a bit more. You needed something, a bit of cut and thrust. And so he strengthened the midfield, and he strengthened up front, and the signings came off for him. And I think the other thing is, it was fortunate that I think that I would like to think that people like Nicky and me had a bit of an influence on the team, having played at a higher level. I mean, I remember when I went and played at Sheffield Wednesday, and I had players who'd been there, done it all with other players. I was trying to learn as much as I could off them. And so I think the other thing that I think Nicky and I did bring was I think we brought a very single-minded attitude, intensity. I think we set fairly high standards, and we would be critical of people. Probably I was too critical at times of people if they didn't measure up, but it meant that people cared, and obviously I think that changed the mentality a little bit. And I think the other thing is, and I think John may have known this or not, I don't know. I remember talking to Gary Megson, good mate of mine who I play with at Sheffield Wednesday, and I said, "Look," I said, "when you were manager at Bolton," I said, "you were like a demented nutter on the side of the pitch." I said, "You were waving, gesticulating, shouting and screaming and pointing and all the rest of it." And I said, "What was that all about?" He said, he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "we played Man United, and Alex Ferguson come in at Bolton for a cup of tea and also to watch the horse racing." He said, "And then we got talking, And he said, look, I get really worked up on the pitch. So, what about you? You must feel it inside. And he says, well, I'm lucky, you're not. He says, I've got about 6 or 7 leaders on the pitch. You've got none. That's why you do it, to try and get them going. So he says, I've got Roy Keane, I've got Steve Bruce, and he rattled them all off and all the rest of it. He said, you haven't got them. And so John Duncan, had people like Nicky, had people like me who were leaders on the pitch. And I mean, it's a big debating point now within the game. Where have all the leaders gone? Everyone keeps saying, what's happened? What's happened to the leaders? There doesn't appear to be as many around at the moment. So, it's been a change. We're talking about how the game's changed. That's one of the conversations. That's one of the topics that people have brought up in recent times.
I think that's definitely a thing, because we've had plenty of seasons recently when Chesterfield have not been doing very well. And like you say, there's sometimes you're just screaming for there to be people on the pitch that are organising each other and keeping each other in check and things like that. And I had John Duncan on the podcast, and he was talking about how those key signings around that time was about bringing in leaders and organisers that could just kind of take that team to the next level. And is that something you can teach people to be like that, or is that just something that's in your character, do you think?
I think the other thing is that both, say using Nicky and myself, is that we didn't ask people to do stuff that we couldn't do ourselves. So I think if people see you doing it, and obviously they see all that determination, they see, because we were both in our twilight of our careers. Nicky was a little bit younger than me. But, as I said, the training intensity, when we used to have practice matches, it wasn't casual, it got serious. And all of a sudden we brought that intensity into matches, and that changed the mentality, really. And if you didn't, someone would probably say something,
Yeah.
2 points clear from the bottom of the 3rd division. They may have slaughtered Rochdale on Saturday, but like lambs to the slaughter, they went down 3-0 to Chesterfield. And it was Chesterfield's Kevin Davies who struck first, clinical finishing from a 16-year-old who's caught the eye of some of the Premier League clubs. Chesterfield showed why they're pushing for the playoffs as Andy Morris slotted in number 2. And it was Morris who claimed his second and the visitors' third with a nifty lob in the dying minutes.
And then that season after, so it's like promotion season, which there's been a bit of a get-together recently, hasn't there?
Yeah, we went down there and we had a nice night out there, and a lot of the players managed to get back. So we had a question and answer session, and they put some videos up and of that particular season, montage of that, and question and answer. So yeah, so it was quite good to meet up with a few of the old boys.
The great unbeaten run that season as well. What's the secret to kind of unbeaten runs and things like that? To just kind of get on a roll? I suppose momentum's a big thing in football, isn't it?
I think confidence. I think also, not losing. I mean, the year we got promoted with Sheffield Wednesday, I think we went 19 games undefeated from the very beginning of the season. And you then believe in the way you play, because it's getting results. And I think the other thing is, by the time that season had come round, John had tweaked it. His recruitment was good. So he basically, as I said, we were pretty strong defensively. We could go anywhere in that division and give anyone a game, not necessarily win, but we'd give them a game. But we didn't have enough going forward. We didn't have enough creativity. We didn't have enough goal scorers. He rectified that, and all of a sudden, sometimes it's about blend and balances, and all of a sudden you got the blend and balance right, and you go on a run, you get confidence, everyone believes in themselves, they believe in the training, you believe in things, even if it's immaterial. Say you get 3 days off, you think, oh, it's great, we're winning. That was it, Or if you're in every day, you're training every day. If you're winning, it doesn't really matter. All of a sudden, these things seem to take on illogical proportions at times.
And what's the secret to your kind of longevity in terms of your career? Because you played on, didn't you? A good
I think injuries. making sure don't get injured, or if you get injured, they're not serious injuries or sort of, career-threatening injuries from that point of view. I think I was also very lucky near the end of my career with Graham Turner at Wolves and also John Duncan, because of my age and everything. They used to nurture me during the week. I couldn't play and train. There was a lot of rest and recovery for me. And as a player at my age, that's what I needed. When I did train, I trained well, but I needed my rest as well. And so I was different to a 19-year-old player, So John recognised that, and I think that's good management, recognising that, while you've got to treat everyone the same, there are situations where you have to treat people differently for the benefit of the team.
And I think it's true in a lot of sports, isn't it, that all those miles over the years, they kind of stay in your legs, don't they? So I suppose you can probably go a few days without training, can't you, and still be good and fit and ready for the match, can't you, come a weekend?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to pace yourself. I mean, when you're playing Saturday, Tuesday, Sunday, Wednesday, or whatever it is, especially in the lower divisions where you're playing 2 games a week and then you have cup ties and everything else, you don't get a lot of time for recovery. And the other thing is, this is where, you're on about leaders. As a manager or a coach, you don't get a lot of time to coach your team because you're on to the next game. So as a result, that's where your leaders come in and sort of driving people on. And, they drive themselves on as well because they want to do well. So, that's the type of sort of business that you're in. You're playing, and you do need to, when to, train your players and when to rest them. You often hear it, especially in cricket, where they say they're overcooked or undercooked, and it's trying to get them just right for that particular game. But as I said, when you're playing every 3 or 4 days, you do have to watch it more carefully.
I had a great comment from Phil Tooley. When I said I was talking to you, and he said I've got to ask you about the 3-0 win at Colchester United, where you played a blinder, and then you had to piece together a newspaper report, and every other journalist was giving you man of the match, but you gave it to Kevin Davis. And he said, I know, because you used his phone to call through the report. Yeah,
I was nearing the end of my career, so to speak, and I started doing journalism and doing match reports for newspapers, and they asked me to do one on Colchester v Chesterfield. So we won there, and then I quickly got changed and had to go up. I had to borrow Phil's phone, I think, to file the report, if I remember rightly. Well, Phil probably charged me now that he knows. So anyway, I think I borrowed his phone, and then at that time, you had to give marks for players and all the rest of it, So that was it. So I mean, the thing is, you win. It's very kind of all them journalists to say that, but when you win away from home and someone scores goals, it's normally the goal scorers that get the man of the match, isn't it? Really, you win 5-0. You don't give it to a defender because you kept a clean sheet. You give it to a striker who scored a hat-trick, don't you? I mean, that's what defenders know from a very early age, that you're not going to get it when the goals are being scored. Even though you keep a clean sheet, you know where the accolades are going to go.
Yeah, definitely. So was it quite an easy transition for you then, kind of post playing? I suppose you had that kind of to move in.
It was, and it wasn't, because it's a different type of business structure altogether. The other thing is I think when I started off, there was a lot of people in the newspapers, radios and TV wondering, well, you're a player, how would you feel about asking someone a difficult question, and they wondered how I would, because sometimes at that time, it's changing a bit now, but at that time they always thought that former players gave managers and players an easy ride, and they were wondering, said, well, whether you're a politician, whether you're a player or a manager, you need to ask the difficult question. For instance, just like you're talking about winning a load of games on the spin, say you lose 6 games on the spot, you have to ask a manager, do you feel that you're under pressure? Do you feel your job's under pressure? So it was that, I think I had to proved myself that I was capable, if and when the opportunity was required, to ask that difficult question. And obviously, having to write a match report, it wasn't so bad for me, because obviously, having gone through a fairly decent education, writing wasn't that, although it was very different writing a match report compared to writing an essay for university. The format was very, very different. If you're at university, you do an introduction, you do a middle bit, and then you do a conclusion. You write a match report, the conclusion's at the beginning. You know who's won, and it's very different. It's a totally different turned upside down. So from that point of view, and I learned a lot of skills. I decided early on that if I was going to earn a living, I'd need to do it through websites. I'd need to do it through radio, writing, and also TV. Nowadays, that's becoming more common. But in those days, when I was starting off, people tended to specialise. You were either a broadcaster or you were basically a writer, print or whatever. Nowadays, people intertwine the lot now.
Yeah, and like going right back to the start, really, with Bob Wilson. He was great talking about when he was first starting to cut up clips and things like that to do kind of analysis of players, and he'd be sat in the basement kind of chopping things up and putting it back together to get a few minutes worth of footage. I suppose things have changed quite a lot, haven't they, over the last few years, and partly down to a lot of the teaching that you did as well.
Yeah, the other thing is now, what has changed quite a lot is people want it instant. Hence, at one time, you'd go away, do an interview, go back to the studio, edit it, cut it, do a voiceover, and then do it for. Now it's all live. A lot of it's far live. You don't see as many packages like you used to. Certainly, it's all live. Even local news. Look North. Calendar. They send people out, and you're doing it live from that particular Sky Sports. Near enough, everything is live. So that's been a big change. People want instant everything. They want to be the first to report it, and they want to be the most accurate at the time.
Yeah.
But you're on about obviously the media course.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That media course, because there's quite a few ex-Spy rights have kind of done that. You've taught quite a few.
Quite a few. We've had quite a lot of success from that point of view. People like Alex Scott from the women's football, Scott Minto, they were there. Jason Lee was there. Felix Bastian. Felix, it was an interesting one because he then moved to Germany halfway through. He had a year at Chesterfield, so he used to have to come back during the summer and spend his summer at Staffordshire University. But he was keen, and he did it, and he did all the requirements, and it was good. So not all of them have gone into the media, but certainly a lot of it has helped. They've got skills that they can transfer, whether they're talking, standing up in front of people, whether they're having to compose reports or various other things. So hopefully, there's been quite a few people over the years that have benefited and still are benefiting from it.
Yeah, and I've had a few players that I've spoken to that have done it. We had a period at Chesterfield when quite a few did it, like Tommy Lee and Aaron Downs and Barry Roach, I think, was doing it all. They're all kind of doing it around the same time, and they're now kind of in coaching again or assistant managers and things like that, and they've said how beneficial it is just in terms of being able to respond to media as a member of staff for a football club, even if it's
I had one former player. He become a director at an academy, and bumped into him at a match, and he said it proved invaluable. He said the number of times I have to write a report and present it in front of the directors to understand, where we are now, where we want to go, how we're going to get there. And I can write that down, give it to them in a report. And then a week later, after they've read it, I go in, see them and discuss it. And he said that's proved invaluable. So he's used his journalistic skills to compile a report. And that's where I think a lot of people have benefited from that point of view.
Are they quite an easy group of people to teach? A classroom full of football.
Well, one thing you get is they're highly motivated. What you find with players, I found, is they go to university. Most people that go to university are 18 years of age, probably the first time away from home. These are lads who've made a conscious decision to come to university. They've got a career. Many of them got a family, so they're not doing it. They're not, fresh, wet behind the ears. They're doing it for a reason. They're looking for a career after, and this may help them towards it. So they're dedicated. They're willing to put the hours in, and from that point of view, when you've got people who respond, who are dedicated, put the work in, put the hours in, it's a pleasure to work with them. Really, you haven't got to work hard to get them going. You set them tasks, you set them assignments. They do it. They ring you up. About this, about that. The number of they just keep questioning. Keep questioning. What do you think about? And they'll come back more and more. So no. When they come on the course, they've come for a reason. They're not 18-year-olds who maybe experiencing probably life away from where they live, away from their family for the first time. This is a totally different group of cohort of students looking for different things.
As you kind of put your feet up now at the end of your career, I imagine you're getting a bit of chance to put your feet up now. How do you kind of reflect on your career? To be honest, I had a bit of an ill health issue a few years ago, and then I decided that was it, take things easy. So really, I do bits and pieces, but for all intents and purposes, I'm pretty much retired now. Sort of try and relax and enjoy things, and do a lot of travelling, go and see places. Have a bucket list that we try and work our way through at different times. We like travelling and going to different places. So that's one of the things. And we've got 4 children. None of them live near us, so we go travelling, see them quite a bit. They're in different parts of the country, even different parts of the world. So that's quite handy as well. Yeah, and I suppose as a footballer, you probably know different parts of the world based on what football teams are there. That's the only way I seem to know geography of the world. It's just through football clubs.
Yeah, well, in many cases, you get a bit of a snapshot of these places, and you're there, you travel in, play the games and everything else. I was very fortunate to travel. There was a lot of travel with the clubs that I was with. And it was interesting seeing different countries at different stages develop in different ways, and the culture was very different. Going to the Middle East, going to the Far East, we went there quite a few times. Very, very different. Their attitudes and values were very different. So it realised, that you don't live in a cocoon. You don't live in a small little world that sometimes we get caught up being footballers.
Yeah. So finally, you had kind of 3 seasons at Chesterfield, didn't you? What were your presiding memories of the club and the town?
I think I always thought Chesterfield was if you worked hard and put in the effort, they responded and respected you. A bit like at Sheffield Wednesday. As long as you had a go, they didn't mind if you lost. Obviously, they didn't want you to lose, but if they thought that you were trying for the team, giving it your all, they got behind you. And they, it's not the most affluent town in the world, so they all knew the value of money. They all knew, what to expect, and the players at Chesterfield were that type. You wouldn't have any Billy Big Time. They wouldn't survive long in that type of environment, really, if you didn't sort of get into the culture of the town and that type of place. You would soon sort of disappear, really.
Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It's lovely to have a catch up about your career. It's always a bit of a whistle stop story, whiz through a career quite quickly, but it's interesting to get your thoughts on kind of time throughout your career. Yeah,
no, my pleasure for coming on. Thanks for inviting me, and hopefully 2 Men and His Dog might watch it. I'm kidding.